Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 185 with my guest, Dave Snyder. Dave is the founder of Guilford Sound. It's a beautiful recording studio up in Guilford, Vermont that So has done many sessions at. I've done a few mixed sessions for some dance projects I've worked on. If you get a chance to check out www.guilfordsound.com, you absolutely should. It'll blow your mind. And if you're looking for a place to go record, check him out. Also, Dave is just one of my favorite people on the planet. He is one of the most genuine and thoughtful human beings I've ever come across. And he has, over the last couple decades, built a really great community, along with his wife, Sarah, who I talked with a couple days ago. A really great community, and one in which, to me, demonstrates the true definition of what a community can be. It's not a community without complications, but it is one that sort of takes into account every person in the community in a really organic way. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly did. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Snyder. All right, well, let's gavel this to order. Dave
Okay.
Snyder, I appreciate you doing this. I've known you now for, I was taught to said the same thing to Sarah. I feel like I've known you my entire adult life. If my adult life started when I joined So Percussion, which I basically feel like that's the case. I crossed paths with you, and so did So Percussion back in 2000 and I want to say
Eight.
two thousand
Yeah,
eight,
seven. Yep, started in seven.
for a project called Music for Trains, and that project really was. I mean, it was. I think you were sort of Sarah's husband and doing your own thing, but then as you built a recording studio since then, and I've since learned that you are like one of the world's authorities on like acoustics and building studios and mics and all of these things, and you've recorded several of the So albums. You've been in the room with us when we've recorded those, and I kind of just wanted to pick your brain a little bit and get to know you personally a little bit better. Like, I think I have a little bit of your story. Like, there's little pieces and parts that sort of get to where what I know of you. But can you just take me back to like baby Dave Snyder and what got you into, like, you drummed with a band called Ruth,
Yeah.
and which I think if you're in the punk world and you know that scene, you maybe not, maybe punk is the wrong word, but you know that.
Oh, it's definitely the wrong word, and I will go
Please,
into that. But go
please.
ahead.
But or ska or whatever it was that the genre. But Ruth is not an unknown band in that world, and I kind of just want to. Can you just back up? Like, what got you into music? What got you into drumming? Were you in a musical family growing up? Like, what
No,
got
not
you into that
really.
at all?
Uh, I just always loved music. I loved listening to music. So I was just a music fan growing up, and it was really the one. I could go into my room and kind of escape everything and just listen to the radio back in the day when people would listen to the radio. So I would
Mm-hmm.
have whoever the DJs were, Pat St. John, Carol Miller, the classic, well, now classic rock, but they were just the rock DJs of the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would secretly also listen to like the adult contemporary love song station, but I wouldn't tell my friends. I remember changing the dial back to PLJ just in case a friend came over, and I didn't want them to see what I was listening to.
I
This
listened
is
to
kind of
the
crazy.
oldies a lot growing up. So like
Oh,
I would
yeah,
listen to, like, oh yeah, sure, I listen to Metallica and Slayer, absolutely, absolutely, and then I'm like
yeah,
hiding and listening to
Sinatra.
Sinatra in my spare time.
Yeah, yeah. So no, I was just a music fan. Um, and then drumming,
What were your folks musical? Like did
no.
they have music in the house? What did they do?
My mother would listen to records. My dad he loves classical music,
Uh huh.
so we had a record collection of maybe 50 records in the house that I listened to over and over again. We just had a record player, and this was in the early 70s, and um, that's just what you did. And then I ventured into the radio world, and there was this whole other thing. So I didn't. I had an older sister who was not really musical either, didn't really explore anything beyond just like the mainstream music. So I didn't have that like older sibling who knew all of the cool underground things. So like in terms of like punk rock, if you're going to talk about punk rock or the hardcore scene or
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, I wasn't exposed to any of that stuff when I was a teenager. Although I had a good friend who was sort of, by osmosis, just by hanging out with him, he was going into New York in the early 80s, like 1981, 82, and going to the CBGB's used to have this Sunday matinee show that was all ages. So all the Bridge and Tunnel kids would go in and play City Kid for a day and, pretend that they were, edgy and,
Well, and just
looking
for
back.
for
What's that?
for folks like myself who grew up in a cornfield with very few tunnels in my life, what is a bridge and tunnel kid?
A suburban kid of New York City. The only way to get into the city, you had to drive through a tunnel or go over a bridge. So it was all the kids from Long Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey, who would come in and try to kind of act the way they thought city, being in the city was, how you were supposed to act, so it's, edgy, aggressive, so like whenever you see like a super aggressive driver, you look at the plate and it's always New Jersey or Connecticut. It's never the people who are living in New York are just like, excuse me, just, trying to just live with each other,
Right,
and so
right,
there's
right.
this weird disconnect, or this idea, or at least that was my experience, which I slowly learned as I moved into the city and then learned how to, like, kind of cohabitate with all these people. It was much easier to hold the door for people than to push people out of my way,
Yeah. Well,
and vice versa.
when you were growing up, did you have any like what professions were your parents in? Like, were you? I mean, when I was growing up, my mom was a French and Spanish teacher, and my dad sold soda. Like he drove trucks and delivered pop. Not that I ever aspired not to be that, but I was just, well, these are career paths, and they never discouraged me from music. But there was like the options for me growing up. That's what I saw. For you, where was your head at? What were you thinking you were going to be when you were growing up? Did you have any
I was
desires to?
terrified. I mean, I grew up in a really affluent suburban environment
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of pressure of, you have to follow this specific path or your life is going to be in shambles. Like you're going to, so which was just very, there was this idea that if you didn't have a white collar job and I don't even know if this was the actual, you know, um, if this was like instilled in me or if I just made this up in my head. But the feeling I had was I would be a complete failure if I had to go into like a blue collar job or something like that. So it
Mm-hmm.
was, there was a lot of pressure to, get through high school, get into a good college, and then get a job, And so my mother was a homemaker,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad was a computer programmer early
Mm-hmm.
on. He was interested in computers all the way back to the early '60s, and and then just worked. He was just a 9 to 5er at a brokerage house working in their, this is pre-IT department, but just working in their information technology, whatever that was at the time,
Mm-hmm.
compiling data and making and disseminating it to people. And then he ventured off with a coworker to develop a product that would, basically a reporting product for brokerage houses to put
Mm.
data together and disseminate that information. So they started a company where there's this subscription based program where you could get these just like books of data on different corporations and how they were doing, and
Mm.
so analysts could make decisions about investing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just rode the wave of the online.com world
Mm-hmm.
and never looked back. So it was a really successful company. So that pressure I was talking about, that internal pressure that I felt, both of my parents were never really, I mean, we didn't have like lots of heart to hearts, but there were a couple of key moments, like my father, when I asked if I could go to music school, and he gave his full blessing for that, and frankly it paid for it. I mean, he was perfectly happy with the idea of me pursuing something that would impassion me rather than just knowing that there was like job security. So that was an eye opener at the time,
Mm.
to be able and to know that you know pursuing something other than a traditional career path wasn't a failure. But in the school system I was going through at the time, it really was. I mean, that was just kind of in the air. Like if you weren't following that path, you were really setting yourself up for disaster. So
Have you ever talked to him about why he had that heart to heart with you the way he did? I mean, I'm curious what little I know about the tech world, and especially knowing the sort of time period your dad was in that world. Like, there's a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, and a lot of experimentation and unknowns, which those four are basically the first four things that are on your degree from music school.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
true. That's really
so there,
true.
there's a lot of overlap. I mean, even though you said your dad went to a 9 to 5, and yes, there's like a lot of differences, but he was making something up out of nothing, and like that is a very artistic sort of premise to start with. Even yes,
Yeah,
it went into brokerage
it's really
houses and stuff,
true.
but I'm
You
I'm
know,
curious.
he wasn't the creator. He wasn't the visionary. But he was able to see the vision. This guy presented this idea to him, and I remember quite clearly. My dad pulled the family, my sister, my mother, and I, to the kitchen table. We all sat down. He said, "Look, I have this steady job.
Hmm.
This was 1977,
Hmm.
and he said, you know, I have this opportunity to start this small business with this one other guy. We're going to get an office. The office was 400 square feet. It was a 2-room office in Manhattan,
Hmm.
and we're gonna try to make this thing go." And he didn't go into details of what the company was. I was at the time I was 7 years old at the time, so
Hmm.
I didn't know really what that meant. But he just said, this may fail spectacularly, and then I'll have to go out and find another job. I may be unemployed in 6 months. We
Mm.
may run out of money immediately, and then just be stuck with a loan that we have to pay back. We have to figure out how to pay it back when we get, if we have to go back to another job. Anyway, they never had to look back. That never happened. It was a very successful company from the very beginning. They had something like 35% growth every year,
Mm.
every single year for like 20 years before they cut out.
Mm.
So um so he understood, like, oh, if there's a vision and passion and hard work, it can really add up to something spectacular. And
Mm.
yeah, so he was I think there was an element of that he wasn't afraid of people pursuing things that made them happy, that
Hmm.
they ultimately lead to living a fulfilled and successful life. Again, I, whenever I talk about this stuff, I'm so acutely aware of the fact that this is all there's the presupposition that there's an infrastructure around us, that the lights will always be on, that the roads are going to be paved, plowed, tended to. My garbage is going to be taken away. I'm going to go to the grocery store, food's there. There's so much stuff that's in place that just happens. Thank God it happens.
Hmm.
And I happen to live in a place where that stuff is relatively stable, at least for the time being.
Hmm.
And so, I grew up in an environment where I didn't have to think about any of that stuff. Even when we weren't, we were living paycheck to paycheck, we were never hungry ever.
Hmm.
And so, we grew up in a very small, modest house in a town full that had, pretty wealthy areas in it
Hmm.
as well. It was relatively wealthy, and stable and comfortable and safe and all that. So, I had the privilege, I had the luxury of dreaming about this stuff and fretting over this supposed failure of not staying in that community and having to live somewhere else where I could whatever that would look like. So it's hugely, as I grow up, I realize just how hugely distorted that reality is. It's so based on all of um these foundational things that most of the world people just simply don't have.
Hmm.
They're subsistence farmers. They just or whatever, they just don't have basic quality of life um, things, components to take, to just live comfortably. So
Hmm.
I'm acutely aware of that. Very grateful for it, and I love the idea of sharing it. So that's where we're at now. We
Hmm.
live in Vermont. I have this beautiful ivory tower studio at the top of a hill in this secluded area, very close to, conveniently located close to grocery stores and 24-hour services. Um, and I have the exact opposite tendency of wanting to shut ourselves in and just be, insulated from, you know, I like the idea of sharing it.
Hmm.
So, and understanding, what a gift it is. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when you talk about, I mean, there's lots of conversations going on now about reality. When you say distorted reality, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and what I know, I mean, it was your reality. It wasn't distorted. That was your reality.
Yeah.
There happens to also be thousands and thousands of other equally valid realities that are constantly butting up against each other. And for me, I'm trying to tease out the like, what is, there are people who have opportunity and privilege and don't do anything with it, and then there are people who have zero opportunity and privilege, and because of a million different reasons, grab onto it and are really go for it. You could have the mind of Elon Musk, but if you're lazy and don't do anything with it, you're not going to put anybody into space.
Right.
Maybe Elon's a bad example, but like there's a weird, complicated web that goes into making anybody who they are. And I'm curious for you. I mean, I want to get to your giving back to community because I picture you not just as a recording engineer, but you're an advocate for other things. Like I know that you support the Boys and Girls Club in Brattleboro. You're very community minded, and when I go to Brattleboro or Guilford or anybody, and I say the name Dave Snyder, they're like, "Oh yeah, Dave!" Like they all know who you are, which is a sign not only just of your gregariousness and the way you are with people, but that you have made an attempt to be in your community and at least be present in ways that are genuine, and that reads to people. The hunter who I met, who only sees you once a year because they come and hunt on your property, sees you the same way So Percussion does. Like, and that
Yep.
says something to me about you. But I want to like back up a little bit. So you got on the bridge and tunnel and moved to New York at some point in your life. What what was your experience like? What did you do? What was your like? You played. Can you talk a little bit about your time playing in Ruth Ruth and sort of
Sure.
what that world was
Well,
like for
so
you?
I first went to Marlborough College in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I met
That's right.
Sarah, whom I'm
Of
married to
course.
still. And
That was by far the best decision you ever made in your life, going to
yeah,
Marlboro,
for
Dave.
sure, for sure. And we moved when I decided to go to music school. She decided to come with me to New York, so we moved to New York, and I was in music school, which was soul crushing for me. I don't
Why?
like again not having the experience of knowing really what I knew I wanted to learn how to play an instrument well.
Mm-hmm.
I went into the jazz program naively thinking that sure, yes, it did translate to skills on the drum set for the rock and roll world, but I am a rocker. I'm not a jazz bow, and I never will be. So I
What's a
basically
wait,
spent
hold on. What's a jazz bow?
a jazz bow, just a jazzer,
Oh,
like a
okay.
bebop guy.
I
I mean,
love
there
it.
were kids. It was such a weird scene. Anyway, I don't need to go into
I
details
love that
about
you
that.
could be like, "What do you play? I play this. What do you play?
Yeah,
I also play this." And
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
knows exactly what music you're talking about. Spang,
yeah,
spang a
yeah,
lang, spang a
yeah,
lang,
yeah,
spang a lang. Even
yeah.
though this is
So,
like probably objectively more difficult to do in a legit setting than
oh
most
yeah,
other drumming settings, but it's
it's true, but it's really it is hard to play a backbeat well,
yeah.
to like really make it sit in. And that it's funny, just like my teacher, I would go see him play. He used to play um, pretty much weekly with Mike Stern
Hmm.
downtown,
Hmm.
and they would do these standards and just go into outer space with their just going all just
Hmm.
metric modulations, all this crazy stuff, and just like hold it together and always come back. But then every once in a while they'd break into like they'd try to rock out, and it would just kind of be embarrassing. I'd just be like, you're not really. That's bad.
You're sitting in
And
class and you're
all
like,
the
"Ooh,
other
pick on
stuff is
me, pick on me,
incredible.
pick on me. I know the answer."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, there's merit to just knowing how to play a stupid backbeat for
Yeah,
sure.
totally, totally.
Anyway, so while I was in music school, I was in a bunch of bands, and one of them happened to be there was a guy named Chris Janata, and my very good friend Mike Lustig. We're in a band called Janata. Chris wrote all the songs. It was like a blues rock band, kind of late '80s, you know, just band.
Hmm.
And they got a record deal. They made a record. They toured. They would open up for bigger acts. I'm trying to think of. I mean, they did like a tour with the Kinks. I mean, they did some pretty good tours for a couple of years, and then eventually got dropped. Their drummer quit. They were just kind of Mike and Chris were floundering, and they just and Mike said, "Hey, would you want to come in and play?" Sure. So I would just show up for rehearsals or whatever, or just or just just to play around. Chris would bring some songs and we would try them, and then eventually it was like, oh, let's be a band. And this what Chris with all due respect, I really he's an incredibly prolific songwriter. He writes a ton of songs. That's basically what his obsession is. When he just sits down with a guitar, he'll start writing something. He'll record a little bit, put pieces together, and write songs. At the time, he really just wanted to get signed. He wanted a career in music. So he thought the way to get a career in music was to get onto a record label, get some support, and then just to be able to do it. More so than just, he was more concerned about that than just writing something from the heart. So he wrote a lot of stuff that, had all the right pieces, but the soul was sometimes really absent. And then he started writing these he went into writing these punk-esque 3-chord kind of songs with a little pop element to them. And we suddenly got all this attention. And so it was like flavor of the month kind of deal, like where the band was one completely different thing. Like we had 2-minute guitar solo songs, the whole song, if we played live, would last 7 minutes, was just painfully boring. Like I've seen, there's been a couple of videos that were floating around. I'm just like, oh my God, why didn't Sarah leave me the minute the show was over? Like, what'd you think? It's over. Get the fuck out.
What did she say? She's like, oh, it was, you've done it again.
Yeah. Yeah. She'd just be like, I won't be going to the next show. Yeah. She would never go to any of the shows. Anyway. So then we, this new batch of songs was, anyway, so then suddenly we were like a punk band, and then this is like in the 90s, they were signing everybody. Like if you had, a bunch of songs and there was some possibility of being, of it, being successful, whatever, they would sign you. So we got signed on those songs, and Chris just started writing in that sort of vein, So I enjoyed playing the songs. They were fun. They didn't necessarily speak to me, they weren't deep. I don't think Chris would say they were super deep, I mean, they were, I in some regards, they were more confessional than a lot of the other songs he had been writing, so there was a little bit more to them. But then that just kind of it just snowballed. We got signed. I decided to leave school to just do that. And
let me stop you for 2 seconds. So is the band called Ruth at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. It was Janata. And then they wanted to get away from the name Janata because they had been signed, and they didn't want record labels to know that there was all this secret, oh, not, we're suddenly punk rockers, so we can't be associated with these, these other,
well, Taylor Swift is still having that problem, and she's people are still calling BS on her for not being a country artist anymore, and it's like,
who's that?
Taylor Swift.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever.
Anyway,
it's all,
that argument seems to never go away.
Yeah, for sure. At the time, it was really there was this whole idea of, credibility, and it was very real. There were a lot of bands who were selling their souls to record labels and doing whatever the label wanted them to do, and
yeah.
So we had no integrity. Signed to the highest bidder.
How did just because I said the thing about your dad earlier? How did the conversation go with your parents when you said you wanted to leave school to pursue Ruth full time?
They thought it was great. Yeah, I mean, because we had a record deal in place and everything. We got an advance. We had a little bit of money to start doing it, and they thought.
How much heavy drugs did your parents do that they were just totally cool with this life approach, Dave? I'm so jealous.
I think part of it is that we had financial stability. They knew that, I could always move back home, if things went south, and I had plenty of opportunities, or I had been working jobs and whatever on my own. I mean, I think they weren't concerned that, I wouldn't necessarily, I would be okay if things fell apart. So They just
Well,
kind of let it happen.
so you're sitting in a recording studio that you built, and you have hundreds and hundreds of the world's best mics, and that's something that you didn't just start doing like 3 weeks ago. Like this has clearly been a passion of yours for a large portion of your life. Was recording or like sound engineering or anything like that in your head while you were like, were these two
Yeah,
things
no, I mean, it
overlapped a
really,
lot?
so like when it came time to record, so before we got signed with as Ruth, there was a guy in Suffern, New York, who was interested in managing Chris specifically
Mm-hmm.
and his songs. And so we went to go make a demo. I showed up with I had like this 1960s Gretsch crappy drum. It was actually a really nice drum set. Like now,
Mm-hmm.
as an engineer, the guy was an idiot. The guy who recorded us was just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, we got to get this out of here, and we got to bring in some, more rock looking thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I only record drum sets that have the sunburst paint on them.
yeah, it was kind of like that. It was kind of like it needed to look like a brand new
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so he set up my crappy drum set and put mics around it reluctantly, and he just was rolling his eyes the whole time. And uh and I got canned from the session. They said, we're going to bring in a guy, to do all the drum parts for Dave's parts, and we'll just and
Who
while it
made
was
who made
a
that
blow.
call? Who
What?
made that call?
Oh, the manager.
Okay, all right.
The manager guy. Yeah. And I didn't really have any skin in the game. It was more just it was just an ego blow. But at the same time, I had never recorded in a studio before, so I was kind of okay with it. It's like,
Mm.
okay, well, let me see how this is done.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a real lesson. It was really a great lesson in introduction into recording.
Mm.
In retrospect, the drum parts that the guy did, it was just, like, like big drums and like big reverb and just horrible sounding, just terrible. But that's what they were. Again, Chris was just trying to get a record deal
Yeah.
any way he could. So he was ready to wear any hat that would make that happen.
Mm-mm.
So actually, I think when Ruth started, it was a little bit more authentic. It was kind of like he just kind of let go and just decided to have fun for a
Mm.
little while, and then boom, we got, we were making something that was a little bit more interesting to watch,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to this like canned thing that was
Yeah.
he was trying to make this product.
Right.
So they actually played a like a like what do you call it when you do a show for like a bunch of A&R people, an expose or whatever? I don't know what
Yeah.
they call
Mm-hmm.
it, something like that.
Yeah.
And they asked that drummer to play. So I went to the show to watch, and I was just like, man, I don't want to be in this band. That guy can be in the band. This band is stupid. I was still in school at the time when that was all going on.
Sadly, that's not the way it went for Pete Best. I
Right.
wish. Poor Pete. He
Poor
got-
feet. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, yeah, so we did get signed, and then when we went into the studio for Ruth, I obviously played all the drum parts and got to do all of that, but I got to watch the whole process, and I got really fascinated with the whole process. I also got fascinated with just the infrastructure of the studio. I was
Mm.
fascinated by, wow, we got this big soundproof wall, but there's what, we can see through. Wow, they're clapping, they're talking over there. I can't even hear what they're saying. This is incredible. How are you doing that? Why would you want that? Oh, of course, the bleed, like just
Mm-hmm.
all of these, basic, assumptions or ideas around studio design
Yeah.
just was suddenly really fascinating to me. And then I just got to watch the whole process. Oh, you overdub stuff, you add double vocals. Oh, that's what that sound is. Oh, so the guy just sings the whole song again to make that happen. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, just learning
Mm-hmm.
all these basic techniques just by watching. So I just got more and more fascinated by the whole process.
Oh,
Fast forward a couple years later, I wanted to leave the band, and left the band. I had a couple of other bands that I was playing in, and we were in this one rehearsal space that had previous tenants had built a small control room about, it was like maybe 10 feet by 6 feet. It was just, a little closet.
mm-hmm.
And and I just started procuring gear, and we would record rehearsals, and then we started, I actually got a multi-track player. It was um, a DA88, a Tascam 8-track player
Hmm.
that used these videotapes, and there was ADAT and then DA88 were the two main things at the
Mm.
time. There was like a lot cheaper alternative than buying like an actual tape machine.
Mm.
And so we started making our own recordings, and so I just kind of went. It was just trial by fire. Just went in and just we had, I bought two really nice mic pre's, and we would just use those two mic pre's over and over again as we layered tracks, and then we would bounce tracks down and add more stuff, and
Hmm.
so I just got to learn that way.
Now,
So
was this studio
full
this studio was in New York? This was the studio in New York
It
that
was in
you.
a rehearsal space. It was
Okay.
in one of those sidewalk grates. You'd open it up, go down, hit your head, get, tetanus on your, rip open your skull every time you went down the basement. And yeah, it was just this, like, it was a literal rat infested basement hole in the ground that we got all the rats out. We sealed up all the holes, painted it, made it as nice as possible. And it's actually still, I think it's still a studio. It's at 66 Rivington Street. I think somebody's still operating it as a
Hmm.
studio. Um, uh, yeah, so just kept buying gear, and then while all that was happening, I was working a job with I don't know if you ever heard of Ciao Bella Gelato,
Hmm.
but that was my I was that was my income at the time. Full disclosure, right around that time, years before, I guess I can't remember, at some point in my dad's career of his business, he handed my sister and me a piece of paper, and he said, "This piece of paper has a number on it that looks big, but the paper is all the thing is worth. It's basically nothing. It's not, you can't do anything with it, but it was a share in his company. It
Mm.
was a private company, but it was nothing we could ever sell or transfer or do anything with. So it was all dependent on the success of the company. If the company went bankrupt, the paper was, worth more, it was,
Right.
nothing,
Right.
but it was
It was more
something.
more of a promissory note than
It was like well, it was not
anything.
even it was not, I was never able to like actually cash it in, I
Oh,
guess
okay.
is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the company eventually got really successful, and they looked for private buyers to buy the company because they wanted out. They were ready to just move on to doing something else, and they thought it was worth a lot more than people were offering, which was the smartest thing they've ever done. And so they decided to put together a package to go public, to go actually sell it on the stock exchange.
Mm.
And so that changed my life. That was like we were, living a very comfortable middle class lifestyle in the suburbs of New Jersey, and then suddenly um, we all became wealthy,
Mm.
basically.
Mm.
So my so um, which is a really kind of dangerous situation to find yourself in. You could really just check out, or
Did you
just
have any
part.
thoughts of doing something like that? I mean, what was your first
No,
instinct of like? I mean, not like you were gonna go, do something crazy with it, but like, what was your first? What were your thought? What was your thought process? I mean, I don't even know how I would handle something like that, and I'm
well,
41.
my
I can't.
first thought process was, this is a huge responsibility. I can't lose this.
Mm. Hmm.
I gotta make sure this is managed properly. And then it was like, this. I just felt the weight of the responsibility of, treating it with respect and using it wisely.
And so, what
Um,
did you put in place? Like, how did what was like the next day when you had that sort of like this awareness? Like for you, what was the like? What sticky note did you put on your desktop
well,
to be like, hey Dave, remember, uh, eat your Wheaties? Like, what was the thing that
yeah.
remind
I
like
mean, it felt like,
don't waste
I
this?
I kept working. I didn't feel like I felt like I still. It took a long time for it to sink in that, the the weekly check from the ice cream store was just like, it just didn't matter anymore.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have, and I it's an it's I want to be public about that. I want because it's an extraordinary situation. It is not I mean, it's a pretty unique situation.
Hmm.
And I want to respect it, and do good with it. And there are
Yeah.
a lot of people who have lots of money that just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. I mean, I'm private about like what it is,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I can live comfortably without having to have a 9 to 5 job,
Well,
basically.
I mean, I want to sort of get into sort of, I think, how you like the way you took those resources and turned them into what you have now. Like you mentioned earlier, like the studio, like your first experience in the studio being one of like what I was hearing you say was like the studio was being used in the same way that a drum set was being used. Like you can use a different cymbal, you can use a different hi hat, you can tune the snare real loose and put a towel over it in the same way that you can put two mics in front of somebody and have them sing and then use the phasing of whatever it is. Like the studio is an instrument too.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about why? Like, if for folks who don't know much about Guilford Sound, you can just go to guilfordsound.com and you can see exactly what it is that when you call it an ivory tower. I mean, it's your dream studio. It's you literally build it to do all the things that maybe other studios weren't capable of doing or what another studio did really well. But can you talk a little bit about how you thought about building the studio, what went into that, and then how you use that studio as a tool, not just for recording, but for community engagement in different ways? I know not just the studio, it's not just the studio that people in Vermont are sort of interfacing with, but it has become through other ways, it has become sort of a focal point in some ways for what you do. And I'm just kind of curious if you can talk about that for a second.
What did you just say?
Let me ask it again. Well, I want to get into your advocacy with what you do with your resources. Maybe this is a two-part question. What were you thinking when you built the studio? How did you go from like, okay, I want to build this studio? What did you want it to do that nobody else was doing? Why did you build it the way you did it? Like, what was your
Yeah.
mindset there?
Well, I felt like moving to Vermont, and that's a whole other story, but we don't have to get into too deeply into that. We just basically moved back to where our school was. We knew people up here, and we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
get out of the city. So moving back to Vermont afforded us the ability to build something that we wouldn't be able to do in a city like New York on the scale that that
Right.
this place is. It's a 5,000 square foot facility. The live room is 750 square feet. It's a pretty large live room for
Mm-hmm.
a studio, lots of isolation booths. So I realized, wow, I can build something from the ground up for the cost of what it would, for the price of what it would cost to just buy this a raw space in New
Mm-hmm.
York.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly the opportunity, the kind of possibilities seemed really endless of what we could do for the room. So I just thought of all the fun things that studios have that would make it, really great. The big motivator for like getting a studio designer was so after the basement studio, I had a studio on 4th Street called Jarvis Sound.
Mm-hmm.
We got, and this is, um, we were able to get, a really decent console. It's actually the same console we have here. It was a professional 64 input API, nice, real beautiful console, custom made for the studio. And the when we bought that space on 4th Street, it had been a studio before. It was a project studio for this guy, and the control room had just massive acoustic problems.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd make a mix, you'd finish it, you'd think, "Oh, this sounds great," and then you'd go into like your car or listen to it somewhere else, and there would just be this like big, puffy, muddy mess,
Mm-hmm.
and you could not hear that in the control room. And it was my first experience to understand that how important the acoustics of the room are, the listening position. The control room means controlled sound. On small near field monitors, things were good, but then when you tried to get the full frequency spectrum right, we would just fail miserably. It was really difficult to like translate things to translate out of that room into the real world. So that was my first experience with, wow, okay, so if we're building this place, I want a really acoustically true control room. So I reached out to Francis Manzella Designs. I had heard some of his mastering rooms that were at Sterling Sound. Sterling Sound? mastering house, that he built a bunch of rooms for them, and then did one or two rooms for Masterdisc. And I was really, it was my experience of going into those rooms and hearing a huge difference. It was the first time that,
Mm.
wow, you can really make a huge difference with, so so that was one of the aspects of building this place. Was I'm not going to just like find a barn and try to make it sound good. I want professional help. And we got it. And then with that came, I just basically said it would be great to isolate everybody. It'd be great to have a large live room, and I want a controlled listening environment. And so Fran Manzella put this package together that hit all those boxes and checked all those boxes. And then we just added some other fun stuff because it was from the ground up. We made an echo chamber that's suspended off the ceiling in the attic. Just things that you would never be able to do outside of, if you were trying to do it inside a city. So as the place is being built, it's, all of the other, the outreach possibilities really started to, I just thought like, oh, how am I going to, what do I want to do with this place?
Mm-hmm.
What do I have to do? Do I need to, do I have a bottom line I have to meet every single year? And frankly, the answer was no. I really didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to do just my projects? No, absolutely not. I just, I love recording. I love recording different types of music. I love doing voiceovers. I like editing things. I like, just all aspects I find enjoyable. And I just, so I just had to like, I was building it as I was planning how it was going to be used,
Was there
and
anything
now
in the
while all this was happening, I should mention I had two very little kids,
yeah.
and Sarah was also starting Vermont Performance Lab,
Mm-hmm.
of which So Percussion was like, I think maybe the third project,
Yeah.
which became this really important arts organization in Southern Vermont. So a lot of my attention while the studio was being built was actually in raising our kids. I wouldn't say I was the primary, but I was definitely doing a lot of the, childcare while Sarah was doing, building Vermont Performance Lab. And then once the studio was built, Vermont Performance Lab was really established, and we started doing all of these, studio projects. So
Mm-hmm.
when Music for Trains first happened, you did no studio work. There was
Right.
no, you rehearsed in a barn. The studio didn't exist. Anyway, so that really opened my eyes, to the possibility of how the studio could be used for all of these alternative musical, worlds, like the your whole biosphere of,
Mm-hmm.
new music, that has some funding, but it's not like a rock band camping out
Mm-hmm.
and, where we make bank, or, cover all payroll for the whole year with a
Right.
1 month project.
Radiohead is not a 501c3.
Right.
They're
Exactly.
they're a
Exactly.
for-profit baby.
Right.
um,
So the studio we built is capable of accommodating, a world class band with an endless budget who wants to camp out here for 6 months. If somebody wanted to do that, we would open the door and host them for as long as they wanted to stay, for sure. Um,
you also built housing on the campus too, so there's housing
yeah,
associated with the studio that if and it's nice housing. I mean, it's not like you're staying in somebody's on a couch with
no,
somebody's with a blanket that.
it's a whole that's a whole other project of another kind of dream, was building this passive solar house. It's built into the ground. It's and passive solar just basically means that, it it's as close to net zero as you can get with, all the solar gain you get
Mm-hmm.
can heat the place. Not to digress, but one example of that is, we had an artist who was staying there they were mixing something for weeks. They were here for like 6 weeks, and one of the weeks was like the coldest we've had in a long time. It was going down to like -20 at night and only getting up to about -5 to 0 degrees during the day. Freezing cold. And something happened at the Earth House. That's what we call this building. And the contractor who built it, Dave Ross, who's also just kind of like the de facto super now, the poor guy. I called him up and said, problem. And he went, sure, I'll go over and check it out. And he went over and checked it out and fixed whatever it was. And then he just asked the person who was staying there, how's it been? They were one of the first people to stay there over the winter. And she said, oh, it's so comfortable. You wouldn't know that, the house is so sealed so tight, but the air is really fresh and my room's really comfortable. But, come to think about it, think of it, it's a little chilly in the kitchen. And Dave looked at the thermostat, and it was 59 degrees, which is pretty chilly in the house, but that's not like freezing. And he went outside, and the heat pump that ran the heating that makes up for, if you don't get enough solar gain, we obviously have central heating in there. The heat pump that ran the heating for the common space, which was the kitchen, the living room, and the hallway, had tripped out 4 days before. So there were 4 days of negative 20-degree temperatures, sun never barely, even peeking through clouds during the day, never getting up above 0 degrees, and it lost 20 degrees of heat. It went from 70 degrees to, or no, not even 11 degrees. It went from 70 degrees to 59 degrees over 4 days. So, if you build things right, that's what you can do. And now, could everybody build a place like that? No, it's not. It's just, it was ridiculously expensive to add all of those layers, which are slowly paying for themselves as, as energy use goes up, or prices go up, we use less anyway.
Well, I wanted to ask you, like, as you were building stuff, I remember there being a couple moments when things were sort of like, okay, cool, the earth house is in the ground, like we got it in there, and we're gonna like check this thing, and there was something like with like the sealant, the waterproofing wasn't,
oh my god,
correct. And I remember I was there whenever you, like, I think I was in the room or there for some reason when you found out about it, and you were just sort of like stomping around, and I was like, what happened, Dave? Like, and you were like, we have to tear the earth house out, and I was like, oh, like, it just, like, the idea that you were just sort of like frustratedly stomping around, and that was the level of anger you got to, like, that was like, that level of problem is beyond me. And I'm kind of curious for you, like, what were some of the like, what did you learn by building this that you could have never have fathomed?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that
Let's
we didn't
say
have to,
I
we
have
didn't have to tear the whole thing out. We had to basically take the roof off.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up settling with that company, and rather than them having tear the roof out, they gave us a new roof, and just put it over the other one. So the insulation was supposed to be 12 inches, and now it's 24. And just because of the profile of the building, you don't know that there's this, 2 feet of insulation. Okay. So the new waterproofing coat went over the other thing, so it wasn't so bad. What have I learned? I've just learned that, you really have to be patient, and that shit just goes wrong all the time. And, ultimately you end up getting something cool. But again, gratitude, I just go back to gratitude. What is all this stuff? This is just such a dream.
Mm-hmm.
I really would be comfortable in a studio apartment. I have all this great stuff, and I really love it. And I'm not ashamed to just continue to buy new gear and make this place as good as possible, and expand and do whatever. But I really would be happy, in a small, if it all went away, I'd be okay. So this is kind of just this really, it's an amazing adventure. And so when things go south, it's frustrating, but I do have perspective, I think, at least, somewhat, of just like, this is crazy that I'm even allowed to do this. I do kind of look over my shoulder every once in a while, waiting for someone to be like, get the fuck out of it, or that I just like kind of like come to suddenly, and I'm under a bridge in front of a cardboard box, and I think it's a mixing board. But it's all just been a figment of my imagination.
The Make-A-Wish Foundation barges in and is just like, all right, Dave, we got to take it back. Sorry, buddy. you have terminal cancer.
It's time to go. So no, but managing all that stuff, I've learned just, how important relationships are really important. I mean, I've had a 15-year relationship with Dave Ross at this point.
Yeah.
And we talk almost daily, whether we're talking about just shooting the shit or just talking about some construction thing,
Yeah.
So I'm in the process of, we're renovating a building downtown in Brattleboro we're outfitting a dance studio in the upstairs for the Brattleboro School of Dance, who otherwise wouldn't be able to, outfit a new place. So, and we're just doing it, and it feels great. I just love that we can
Yeah.
do that kind of thing.
Well, I have two more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. I've already swallowed up about an hour of your time. The first one is more, and they both of them are revolve around relationships, which is what you just mentioned. But first is more of a nuts and bolts. What, in terms of a relationship between an ensemble or a solo act or whoever's going to come in and record something with you, and you as the whether or not you're actually engineering the session, but you as the person who's going to open the door and say, "Come on in, let's get you set up." What is the best way for an artist to set up a great relationship with a recording engineer or a recording house, wherever you're going? What's the like sort of best first impression you can make, barring actually sounding good and doing your job once you're all set up? What are some things that you've come across that people have done it well and people who have not? You don't need to name names, but like,
No, I think the most important thing is to be extremely prepared and to know that when you come into a place like this, you can sound like, if you sound like shit before you get here, you're going to sound terrible. It's going to be a great representation, a crystal clear representation of dog shit. So so when bands are prepared, it goes so well. There's nothing more frustrating than a band that comes in, they're not prepared, they play out of tune, they're out of time, and then they look at you and go, the snare drum sounds a little tinny, and you're like, the snare drum is not the problem. So
yeah,
and there's so many sessions where I can put one mic in front of the drum set and it's done, like
mm-hmm.
the person plays balance, you get the whole thing. I've done whole records in 2 days from tracking, overdubbing, and mixing, that are my favorite records, and they sonically sound huge and beautiful and lush, and just everything's there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because they showed up prepared. So I mean, the biggest thing is, if you're going to come to a place like this, to respect the fact that the gear it's just a means of getting something onto format to listen back to it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, there are all these fun bells and whistles in the studio, and you can do, quote unquote studio magic and fairy dust and add fun effects and all that kind of stuff, but you have to have a foundation to work with. If the initial performance is bad, there's nothing you can do with that. So there's nothing more satisfying than convincing somebody. We'll have people say, I have $1,500, and our book rate is $1,500. You get two engineers, an engineer and assistant who also operates as a runner, who can go out. You get 12 hours in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll say, okay, you have $1,500, and what do you want to do? And they'll say, I want to make a whole record. And you go, okay, well, that's probably not possible unless, let's just try to walk them through what they can get for their time in the studio, what they expect.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is just lowering expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and also just raising their own expectations of how prepared they should be once they get here. So a lot of times I'll talk people out of even coming here initially. I'll
Mm-hmm.
say, well, let me hear where you're at, and I'll give advice about, you know,
Well, that sounds
rehearsing more.
again. I think just the idea that we're talking about relationships here, like I think that as a relationship, that's a good way to approach a relationship from your end too. You don't want them wasting their money.
No, I really respect the fact that they're
Like,
saving up their money to come to a place like this, and I want them to be happy.
right?
So, and it always, when people are prepared, everybody leaves really happy, and it just sounds better. It makes it easier. You can shine up stuff and make it, and edit things and get things lined up, and there's so much you can do these days to kind of Frankenstein something together. But and successfully, I've done some records where things were just horribly out of tune, out of time, and all this kind of stuff, and we've just done the the sledgehammer approach on everything, and just lined it all up, and you'd be hard pressed to tell that it wasn't played that way, that it wasn't. But um
I've benefited from a few of those sessions with you, Dave.
yeah.
In full
Well, it
disclosure,
depends on the piece.
full
Yeah,
disclosure.
some of these pieces you guys are handed are so challenging. I mean, there have been some classical pieces where a composer has come in, and it's the nature of that whole world where these musicians aren't necessarily prepared enough to play the piece that they've been given.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be doing measures at a time. So I hand them all this, this just these ribbons of just just pieces of paper that this guy's going to glue together back when he goes back
Yeah.
to his home studio and come up with something. So that's so yeah, relationship wise, I mean, I would just say that um, it's you know it's all just mutual respect, just having respect for the place. I've had people come here who have said, well, it's way too expensive. Can you cut me a break? Um, what am I trying to say? Uh, like, nickel and diming what has already been nickel and dimed,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm
Mm-hmm.
basically, running the studio at a loss. And I'll explain to them what you're asking me to do is pay my employees and accommodate the price, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
basically paying for you to be here right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is really hard to
I
convey.
think, do you have a thing like when you give costs for your studio time, do you have the sort of like, this is the actual cost and then this is what I'm charging because this is what I want to charge, or because this is the going rate? Or I mean, sometimes regardless of what you want to charge, the going rate is, depending on the economy or whatever, is a certain,
I can tell you right now that we are very transparent and there is no margin. So when we charge $1,500
Mm-hmm.
and I have the staff here to run the session, when you take into consideration, just what it costs to
Mm-hmm.
keep this building running, that's how much it costs to just be here with that staff. I
Per day.
will not pay people
Mm-hmm.
a non-living wage. So we
Yeah.
pay people well, whether we have sessions here or not, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to do that.
Yeah.
So so because of that, I expect other people to respect my employees as well, and expect them to get paid what they get paid.
Yeah.
So when the sheet says this, it's an added X amount of dollars a day, that goes right into the pocket of the employee who's doing that
Yeah.
part of it. So yeah, there is no markup. It's basically we're hoping to operate at cost, and if
Mm-hmm.
we can do that, I'm really happy. It's not it's somewhat like a nonprofit in that regard, although granted, if we were able to book out the whole year, it would start turning more of a profit.
Yeah.
But I would also have to add more employees. So the
Right.
margin is like it's a very, very slim margin. We're not a nonprofit. We are a for-profit company, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't make a profit.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
just we're really just breaking even here. So
What is the I mean, in terms of the sort of studio artist relationship, you know, I've been in different studio situations where different engineers will um, give opinions on your playing or on something or on the sound of what you're doing without any knowledge of why you're making that sound or what piece you're talking, or what piece you're like, you know, playing a drum in Paul Lansky's music or Steve Mackey's music is different than playing a drum in, say, Xenakis. And we think about that stuff all the time. But also, I know artists come in and they're just like, I want an SM58 on my drum because that's all I record with. And you're like, bro, why did you come here then? Like,
yeah.
and like, where do you, how do you navigate that world as an engineer to sort of like, sort of step into producer world a little bit without stepping on any toes? Like,
Oh, I,
how do you
I'm
navigate
I'm
that?
actually a believer in really trying out what people want to do. If somebody
Mm,
comes in and they're dead set on putting an SM57 on the snare drum, and that's all they've ever done, and that's what they do, great. If they know where they want the overheads to go, and that's the only way they've ever done it, great. So I'm willing to try, but I'm also willing to say, let me point out that this whatever is not working, or whatever. It's just communicating, but I don't believe that I know the best way to do all of this stuff, and I also believe that artists are, many people are now so much more well versed in the recording technique process.
mm-hmm.
It can be a little frustrating though sometimes, where it's like, I'm not telling you how to hold your bow on your cello, don't tell me where to put the fucking microphone. I'm going to get
Right.
your cello recorded, it'll be okay.
Right.
It's
Right.
going to sound like your cello. Just back the fuck off, and let me
Right.
just and it's not rocket science. There's only so much you can get out of, when you hear the cello in the room, does it sound like you want it to sound? Great. Well, if we put a mic, somewhere near you within three to 6 feet of your cello. The closer we get, the less room influence. The farther away, you're going to hear more of the room. We're going to get a cello. So I'm kind of a meat and potatoes guy. I think that there can be self-aggrandizing where it's like, it doesn't, the engineer doesn't feel important unless they put 6 mics around something. I'm kind of a pragmatist where, and maybe this is self-aggrandizing, but where, if you put the more mics you put up in front of something, the more phase issues you have. It becomes difficult to, keep things cohesive and sounding real. You can get something that sounds, the impression of a cello with cool elements to it, or that may not be, proper or correct. And if that's what you're going for, you can get, really cool sounds still. But I'm not necessarily a purist. I'm a pragmatist. I like things to be, I want to get going. I want to get to the performance rather than dealing with listening to the kick drum for 12 hours. That said, there's some engineers where, like, when they're real sticklers for making sure all that stuff works before people actually hit record, it makes it a lot easier on the other end too. So sometimes that bites me in the ass where sometimes I just want to get going. I'm just like, that's good enough. And, we will be able to, make that sound really good later. It's enough of an impression of the drum set. I think we're good.
I've been seeing this meme going around social media, and it's a recording engineer sitting at the desk with like smoke coming out of ears, and he's just screaming, "Fix it in pre."
Yeah.
Like the musicians were always like, "We'll nudge it in post."
We have a Batman Robin saying, "Fix it in the mix," and he's in the mid sentence saying that, and Batman's slapping him saying, "No, we'll fix it now." You'll fix that shit right now.
Well, I think that just harkens to your sound good before you come in the room, and that is going to fix most of your problems.
Oh my God. I can't tell you how many times you're like checking the line, you're checking the mic, you try other mic pre's, you're plugging in compressors, you're EQing, and then you're just like, oh, the source sounds like shit. This person sucks. There's nothing I can do, and then the other example is you plug in something that's broken and it sounds amazing. And like, only later you're like, oh shit, there's like ground hum on that thing. But listen to that performance, let's figure out how to get rid of the ground hum, So it's really true. Like when the source is really good, things go really smoothly and it just sounds good. It's incredible,
Well, I think that's a good place to leave the recording thing. And now I want to ask you one final question, but it is something that's been on my mind, I think, for a long time with you personally, but given the sort of events in society recently and in the last, especially the last 5 years, where people generally are having a hard time talking to each other and developing relationships with each other because somebody owns a gun, or somebody is in the NRA, or somebody voted for Trump, or somebody is pro-abortion. I don't know people who are pro-abortion, but people who are pro-choice or pro-life, and like that's just a deal breaker for everybody. And something about you in the way, and I said this to Sarah too, but I feel like there's a difference in the way that you do it than the way Sarah does it. And I'm very curious if you can just talk about, like, you live in a rural Vermont community. We came up and did the gun show project there, and got to meet some hunters. We talked to a police officer from the area. And everywhere I went, I was just struck by your personal ability to, regardless of your privilege and your status and your upbringing in life and the things you've been given, you seem to, with a scalpel, just slice right through the bullshit and are able to talk to people and develop relationships very quickly, and that last for a long time. And I'm just like, and not to say that there's never been a complication in that you've never had a fight with somebody and never disagreed and never ended a relationship or anything, but is the way you talk to people in your community around you, are you consciously trying to see people as wholes, or is it rather than sort of just an idea they had? Like, how do you navigate the world you live in? Because you're an artist living in rural Vermont, and I think if I was just going to paint with a broad brush, I would say, well, that doesn't work. Like, how can that possibly work? But it does, and it can, and it has for a very long time with you and Sarah in particular. But for you, can you talk a little bit about just your mindset?
Yeah,
and
what's
how you
funny
think about
is
this
that,
stuff?
since we moved here, I've been acutely aware of just how everybody, so many people know there's so much crossover. So, I've been aware of, you know, what I say, who I cut off, who, like when you're in New York, you can be relatively anonymous to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easier to be a dick, you know.
Mm.
And I've definitely been a dick, at for whatever reason, or I've just been much more aggressive, waiting in line before they had the Metro cards, waiting in line to buy subway tokens. Line of, I'm next in line. Somebody comes up. There's a line of 12 people. Somebody comes up and puts their money in the thing and grab their money, throw it on the ground. Fuck you, get in the back of the line. I'm not going to do that here. I would let the person go in and just be like, okay,
Yeah, because
I can let that.
you're going to
I've
see
learned to
that
let,
person later.
I'm sorry.
You're going to see that person probably sooner than later in Vermont than you would in New York.
Yeah.
And so they're going to remember that you're the person who grabbed that money out of your hand, and that is going to color everything, every interaction you have.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just don't have those kind of confrontations here, and so that's kind of led to I've like slowly learned how important it is to just respect people and really get to know somebody. That the skin, their bumper stickers, their whatever they have,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're doing, is just it's uh, there's a soul in there on all
Mm-hmm.
these people, to some extent. I think there's a level of psychosis right now that there are some people that are just not, there is no reasoning. So there's no reason to even have a dialogue right now, which is scary. I mean, I really do believe that we're living in a time where fascism is on the rise, and some of these people are just, who are in my community and around, are just, I'm just simply not going to engage at all. So but uh at least for now, I think that the like once the source of the psychosis goes away, I'm hoping over time there will be a reckoning, or a healing, or something, a reversal. I'm hoping.
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't have very high hopes, but I'm hoping.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I just I've learned since moving here. I've learned to appreciate all different kinds of people. So all of these, these preconceived notions of who somebody is based on whether they're wearing fatigues, a tie dye, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's really disintegrated quite a bit, just because you're just you just I don't even know why I've interacted with all these different people. Some of it is just really not by choice. It was just, I mean, because we bought this big piece of land,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly all of these people who hunt, who tend to be more, if you're just going to paint with a broad stroke, like rural, um, people who, and it's an easy stereotype to just say redneck, or whatever, but they're not necessarily rednecks at all. But that's with a broad stroke. So it's a whole group of people that I otherwise probably wouldn't have as of a meaningful relationship with. And just like all groups, there's always surprises of what you'd think they think, and how it can be actually just the opposite. I know some really progressive people who are hunters, um, and live in that world. What am I trying to say? I don't know. I
Well,
just,
I'll just give an anecdote for me. We were before we went hunting, we were hanging out, and I'm blanking on the names, so maybe you can fill them in. There were
Hank and Dickie.
Hank and Dick, and then John was
Yep.
the other hunter that Eric went out with. Um, but I remember who was the one that also hunted like bison or elk in Wyoming.
Oh, was that Travis Slade, the roofer?
He was an older guy. Older guy.
Oh well, Hank lives in Wyoming. I guess
Okay,
he would do some elk
it was
hunting out
Hank,
there too. Yeah.
and he was telling us how he shoots these elk with like a 50 caliber or something or other, and he was talking about how like and I'm having this conversation, and I remember saying like, what do you think of the NRA? And he's like, I'm not a member. And I immediately, and we were doing a show about the Sandy Hook shooting, and the entire social media world was like NRA guns, and NRA were tied together in this way that you had to make the assumption that if you owned a gun, you were an NRA member. That's not true, clearly, but that was the sort of overarching. So when I was having this conversation, I expected Hank to just be like, "Oh yeah, the NRA is this, and this, and here's what I believe. And he was just like, yeah, I left them a long time ago. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he didn't really go into much. He just was like, yeah, they didn't speak to me, and I just felt like it was a waste of money. So I, you know, but so it caught me off guard in this way that I didn't quite know how to like. And then he's just like, so what are you guys writing? And like we started having this conversation about like these weird abstract pieces and conspiracy theories. And to me, the thing that was what I learned from that moment was that I actually avoid a lot of conversations out of assumptions and fear, and that sort of dislodged for me this like, oh yeah, of course. I have broad brushes too, and I need to
Yeah.
use them less if I can. And getting to know Hank and Dave,
Dickie.
Hank and Dickie and John, like I still correspond with John. John made us a whole set of wooden spoons that he carved, and we
Yeah, he's
still
the
use them
greatest.
to this day. And I think had I not had those conversations out of fear, I would regret it. And I just am like, for you, is there any moment like what for you? Like, has there been any particular thing of like where you had an assumption about your community and it was completely upended? I mean,
Yeah.
You're not a
That
Vermonter.
was
You're
that was a
not.
big one for me too. I mean, the fact that, he also, um and I feel like maybe you should beep out their last names, but he also
You don't. We
was,
just said their first names. We didn't say their last names.
I said their last names
Oh, okay. I'll edit it out.
earlier, I'm sorry. But
That's fine.
that he doesn't believe necessarily that, or that there should be some sort of regulation around assault rifles, um so, and that again was surprising, that that he wasn't just like everybody should just be able to do whatever they want,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was, and again, my own, fear slash prejudice, whatever. um yeah, I mean, I think working through that fear is the biggest thing. I think one of the reasons why I get along with people is because I'm terrified of people attacking me. Like, it goes back, so I'm really good at playing nice, which, and I so I and I'm and I've learned over time how to be tactful and actually confront people with tact.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely err on, being not cutting through and saying, it takes a while for me to get up the courage to, actually ask the tough question.
Well,
um
you also strike me as somebody who's like, yes, you're sort of like you want to play nice, but I do feel like there's a strong sort of foundation under that of like there's also a desire to build trust first, and
yeah,
somebody isn't gonna call you out as viciously if they trust you. They'll
yeah,
sort
it's
of
really
You
true.
can have a good conversation that way, and this like the fact that you've invested so much in your community with Brattleboro Music Center and this new dance space you're building, like whether or not people say it, that is a there's currency of trust there, and
Yeah,
it sort of radiates out in other ways that maybe aren't completely predictable. But I think
it's
tr-
it's infectious too, man. I mean, when you do, I've just seen, like, when you treat people with respect and you're positive and you try to move things forward in a positive way, boy, it just grows. It makes other people want to do the same thing. So there are
yeah.
other people in our community who give and do a tremendous amount of service, and that's been hugely influential on me to just see these people
Mm.
do it. I'm also seeing our population is aging out. A lot of people they're getting older, and they're either dying or retiring from some of these volunteer positions. And this new we're the new guard.
Mm.
I just turned 50, and here we are. It's time to step up and continue to serve. So
Well, you don't
um
look a day over 73, Dave.
I hope to stay, yes, stay looking this haggard self for the next 20 years. So.
Well, Dave, I have stolen way too much of your time. This is really fun, and we haven't had this formal of a conversation without really vulgar commentary. And maybe we'll do podcast part 2, and then people can see how we really are with each other. But I really appreciate your time. Can you like where can folks, if they want to learn more about Guilford Sound or the Brattleboro Music Center is another organization that you guys advocate with and for, and the Boys and Girls Club, and can you just lay out where folks can find out about this stuff if they want to learn more?
Sure. Well, Guilford Sound, guilfordsound.com. The Brattleboro Music Center is BMC Vermont, bmcvt.org.
Mm-hmm.
It's just basically a music school slash. They do performances as well. I'm also pretty passionate about Groundworks, which is a place that we've been heavily involved in helping them build a new shelter. Unfortunately, we still need shelters. There's a big homeless population here. Lots of like homeless working mothers. It's again stigma. It's really easy to just paint with a broad stroke. Like, if you're homeless, there's you deserved it somehow, or you're a hobo or whatever. And there's a lot of working poor people who are just working with kids and not anyway. So we're building this beautiful new shelter. It's really exciting. So Groundworks is an organization I'm really passionate about right now, and they need all the help they can get. And they do just tremendous work for our community. The goal is to basically get people in houses, get them in houses. You get them into a house and things can really start to change. And again, going back to, what I was saying earlier, that there were all these things that just happened for me. I had a roof over my head. I didn't have to think about that stuff growing up. And there's a whole population of people that's all they think about is whether they're going to have a roof over their heads, and what a difference it makes. You can really change somebody's life by just giving them this inkling of stability. And it just goes, and nobody wants to be a deadbeat, or this idea of just being a deadbeat. And when you put people in houses and give them just basic needs, wow, it makes a huge difference. So that's an organization I'm really passionate about right now. So Groundworks Collaborative is the full title. I don't know what their website is, but they're a Vermont organization.
I'll find it and put a link in the sort of description of the podcast, so if folks want to donate or.
Yeah. Okay, great. I can send that to you. And then another organization I belong to and am passionate about is called Community House, and small state, so small number of beds. They have 6 beds for kids who are coming out of being taken out of really dangerous situations, and unfortunately the demand is super high right now. Kids who are basically who need to temporarily leave their folks for whatever reason, get to stay in this wonderful place in Brattleboro. It's a house.
The unexpected or the unintended consequence of this COVID lockdown is like, and I had this thought immediately, was like, if I was in an abusive household, this is my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Like you get to go to school for 8 hours a day and you're not at home with your parents who you loathe or you're terrified of or whatever. And like
terrified of, yeah.
Oof. Like I haven't seen hardly any conversation around that sort of issue, but man,
it's chilling.
Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was really fun. Tell Sarah I said hey, and
I hope it was focused enough. I tend to veer. So.
Well, Dave, look, now I have questions.
Well, I did want to mention Vermont Performance Lab too, because that was just a huge that really also opened the door for me, just in terms of like what was possible at the studio. So and Sarah is just such a force and a powerhouse when it comes to organizing things. And the state's lucky to have her now as a legislator. I definitely miss her working on although there were lots of conflicts with like trying to, who's going to get the housing. So we actually lost a lot of big commercial sessions because of So Percussion and other projects. But, I think we're better for it. I think it's been really enriching, You
really rallied that one, Dave. Good job.
What's that?
You really brought that one home in a good way there. Like,
That's right.
Leave me with a big old pile of guilt on my shoulders.
Yeah. I shouldn't have said So Percussion, but it's just
it's
right
true,
there.
Though.
So.
It's true.
Anyway, so I did want to mention Vermont Performance Lab, but.
All right, well, Dave, you stay healthy and safe, and I wish every day that we could get together and hang in person, and I cannot wait to do it again.
I'm ready, man.
Until then,
vaccine.
Oh my God, I can't wait. Well, until then, Dave, stay healthy and safe, and I can't wait to chat soon.
Say hi to Stephanie. I'll talk to you soon.
Will do. See you, buddy.
Peace.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, DunleavyPans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandro Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.